In the meantime, we'll go ahead and show Eike Langbehn's pre-recorded video. He is a professor of media informatics at Hamburg University of Applied Sciences. His fields of work include extended reality and games. He studied computer science in Oldenburg and Hamburg and graduated with a PhD thesis on perceptual aspects of virtual reality, locomotion in 2019. In 2020, he co-founded Curvature Games, a Hamburg-based game studio specializing in narrative virtual reality experiences. Since 2012, he has worked in the game industry as a programmer and game designer on titles for different platforms, including web, mobile, and virtual reality. Eike's research is focused on 3D interaction in spatial environments. It is driven by the question of how stories can be told in interactive media. He published in the most competitive conferences of the field, including ACM SIGGRAPH and IEEE Virtual Reality, and is actively involved in the research community. Eike is a member of the IEEE, ACM, and GI. He is on the program committee of the most renowned conferences in the area of virtual reality and augmented reality, and serves as a reviewer for several national and international conferences and journals. And with that, we'd like to play a pre-recorded video lecture that Professor Langbehn has kindly shared with us. So if Arnab, if you could play that, and thank you everyone once again for your patience.
At the Hamburg University of Applied Sciences, and I'm really proud to give this talk at the hackathon, because the hackathon is also dedicated to the connection or to the mix between art and AI. And I think that games are one of the most interesting modern forms of art. So I hope this talk will fit pretty well to the interests of the participants of this hackathon. So in this talk, I want to give an introduction to the topic of interactive storytelling, of the way, of the kind of way you can tell interactive or stories in an interactive way in games. And I will also raise the question how we can use AI for creating these stories, or at least for helping in the creation of those stories. This I won't answer so many questions in this talk, but I will raise a lot of questions. So it's not about how can pick this AI algorithm to create a story and then you're done. It's more like, hey, so far we did it this way to create our stories for our games, and this was done by humans, and now the question is, how can we involve an AI into this process? So in the beginning, just a few words about myself. I'm a computer scientist with a focus on human-computer interaction, game development, and virtual and augmented reality systems. I worked a couple of years in the games industries as a programmer and game designer. I also co-founded my own game studio, Curvature Games, where we develop virtual reality games that are also very narrative driven. And since the beginning of this year, I'm a professor at the Hamburg University of Applied Sciences, teaching and researching in the area of these topics, HCI, games, VR. And during the course of my work in the games industry, I worked on a couple of games that were very narrative driven, or where the story was a centerpiece of the games, like Frozen Factory, or also the Amusement, which are VR games. Especially the Amusement is a narrative driven game, also so-called walking simulator, where the story is actually the heart of the game. So I'm pretty much familiar with interactive storytelling, at least traditional storytelling, which is done by humans. And now the question is, hey, how can we involve AI into this process of interactive storytelling? But before I talk about games, let's start with some basics of storytelling in general. So always when you want to tell a story, for example, in a book or in a movie, you usually have kind of story arc, a structure that you use to create your story. This is one of the most classical approaches, the 3-act structure, exposition, climax, resolution, and you have kind of rising action, rising tension during the course of the story, and then a falling tension in the end. And you can use this structure to structure your story, so to help with the creation of the story. There are also other structures, or more sophisticated structures, like the hero's journey is also a very popular one that describes the journeys, like the different steps that the hero needs to take during the story. And this can help with the creation of your own story when you know, okay, I need to have these steps inside my story, and then it will build up tension, it will be interesting, and so on. And since these are structures, they are also learnable by machines. And this is where AI comes in. So at the moment, it's already possible that AI, so machines can create stories in form of text. Especially the GPT-3 AI from OpenAI is, I think, at the moment the best AI for this. And there are some examples. For example, last year there was an article in The Guardian which was completely written by GPT-3, and the same AI also is known for writing poetry. This is another example, also generated with the help of GPT-3. Of course, there must be a human who gives some input to this machine, but then the algorithms do the rest and create this. So at the moment, these are only like smaller pieces, smaller articles of poetry, but it is very likely that in the next couple of years, AI will also be capable of writing whole stories like books or screenplays for movies. I think it's not anymore. Actually, I don't know of any book or movie that was completely written by an AI right now, but I think it's not the question anymore if this is possible, only when, and it will be in a couple of years that we see at least AI supported stories in traditional linear media like books and movies. So, and this is because these machine learning algorithms get a lot of input. They can read books, they can watch movies, and then learn how these stories are structured to create their own stories. One interesting piece of research from the MIT is here. They taught a machine to watch movies and analyze the movies. This is an example from Up, the movie Up, or only the opening sequence of the movie, and their machine, or their algorithm gave scores to the different moments, to different seconds of this scene. And these are scores between 0 and 1, and you can see like this, the whole scene is 12 or 13 minutes. And you can already see that this is pretty similar to this 3-act structure that I showed in the beginning a couple of slides ago. So the tension or the action is rising until the climax, and then it's falling again. So a machine can already understand where they find this pattern, can already find this pattern in any movie or book. So, and this is the first step to be able to create a story on its own. When I say like an AI can create a story, maybe I also don't mean that it does this alone, but it still needs input from, like, a human needs to ask questions, and then the AI can answer with a text or a story. And often, even if this is not perfect from the beginning, this then again can be used by a human to to tune and to polish the story. So, but how about games? In linear media, books or movies or news articles or so, we only have the story. Like it's only some text that needs to be generated. Yeah, of course, and the text needs to be written in an interesting way that builds up tension and so on, but we only have the story. In games, we do not only have the story. The experience of the game is made up by two pieces, basically, the story and the gameplay. And most often the gameplay is even more important for the experience of the game. So let's look into gameplay first. Like AI was used in games since years, but it had a little bit of different meaning in game development so far. So when we look for AI in games, most often we find just simple decision trees or pathfinding algorithms for computer controlled characters in the game. So an enemy in the game needs to know when he should hide or when he should seek the player, when he should shoot. So this is made of by decision trees, or enemies or in general computer controlled characters in a game need to find the correct way from one point to another. For example, A-star algorithm is used very often here. But this is not what we mean by modern AI, which is based on machine learning. This is pretty unfamiliar for use in game development. But I don't want to put too much emphasis on that. This is not the topic of the talk. Just wanted to show, okay, AI was used in gameplay, okay, but it's not the AI that we're talking about right now. Let's go on. So we have gameplay, we have story. How do we connect these two things? There are several possibilities. One is to do it like this, have one piece of gameplay, and then we have one piece of story, and then we have one piece of gameplay, and then story, and so on. This means like you play a little bit, like, I don't know, you fight against an enemy, and then there's a stop, and you, I don't know, have a dialogue with a character, or you watch a cutscene, which is basically a movie, but you don't have any interactions during the story parts. We can also watch an example for this.
Crap. This is really not good. Hold on! Nathan! They're gaining on us! I know! Well, crikey! I'm going as fast as I can!
The first part was a cutscene like the movie, and now it's switched to gameplay, and they can actually control the character and shoot enemies with the ship. And so,
got it!
what I wanted to show is just it's pretty separated. First the story, then the gameplay, and it's a pretty linear also. You don't have much choice. Another possibility that is also found very often in games today is the branching approach. So at certain points in the game, the player can choose which way he wants to go, like in which direction should the story go. There are some decisions, and depending on the decisions of the player, the story continues. Yeah, also an example of this.
Listen, I know it's not your fault. These emotions you're feeling are just errors in your software.
No, it's not my fault. I never wanted this. I love them, you know? But I was nothing to them. Just a slave to be ordered around. I can't stand that noise anymore. Tell that helicopter to get out of here.
The situation is under control.
There, I did what you wanted. to trust me, Daniel. Let the hostage go, and I promise you, everything will be fine. I want everyone to leave! And I want a car. When I'm outside the city, I'll let her go. That's impossible, Daniel. Let the girl go, and I promise you won't be hurt. I don't want to die. You're not going to die. We're just going to talk. Nothing will happen to you. You have my word. Okay. I trust you.
Okay, this was from Detroit Become Human, and as you could see, at certain points the player could decide what to answer, and depending on the answers, the story took a different direction. And here you can see the scene in as a whole, with the different branches and the different possible endings for the scene. The one we just saw there, the guy was killed in the end, but there are some other possible endings. So for these kind of games, like where we have story and gameplay pretty separated from each other, there exist a lot of tools that you can use to create these kind of stories, like RTC Draft, Arcweave, or Charisma. It's just like graphical tools where you can put in your story and connect the different pieces, and even put in triggers when they should start or when they should be played. And basically the story parts are always just like more or less like movies. And if they're like movies, we could just have an AI write the screenplay for this movie or this cutscene. And in between we have gameplay, but the story or the gameplay, but no, other way around. The story is not affected by the gameplay, really. So it's not such a huge difference to a movie. So we could just use an AI to write the texts or the screenplay for this, and then use this as input for such tools that you can see here. And then we would have also an AI written story in a game. So at least when it's also possible that an AI writes a book or a screenplay for a movie. But in games we have some more problems. So especially the connection between story and gameplay is important. So a game is interactive, and the player can do things in a game that are not possible in a pretty linear media like a movie, and this can cause problems. This can also cause story problems. So one pretty prominent problem is called the ludonarrative dissonance, because there's a gap between the narrative that is told through the story and the narrative that is told through the gameplay. Like I brought short examples to understand this better. So this is from Tomb Raider, and pretty early in the game, Lara Croft needs to shoot a deer because she's hungry and she needs something to eat. And in a cutscene, she goes to the deer that she just killed, and she's pretty sad and cries and is very emotional about this, and she's very sorry that she had to kill this animal. And this does not really fit to the gameplay of the game, which looks like this.
Up there! She's on the second floor!
So as you can see in the gameplay, Lara has to shoot a lot of enemies, human enemies even, and she does not cry or is emotional about this. So here the narrative told through the gameplay and the narrative told through the cutscene do not match. There's a huge gap between them, and this can cause this little narrative dissonance. And this is something that would also occur when the story bits are just written by an AI and the gameplay is completely separated from this. So we need some kind of connection between these two to really interweave gameplay and story with each other to be able to tell a good interactive story. And I really like this quote from Bob Bates, who's a veteran game designer. He said, story and gameplay are like oil and vinegar. Theoretically, they don't mix, but if you put them in a bottle and shake them up really good, they're pretty good on a salad. And this describes it really good. So I collected some methods that make us able to do this, like to bring together gameplay and story, at least in a traditional way, like created by humans, not by AI. And we will look later if this could also be done by an AI. So the first one is emergent storytelling. Emergent storytelling means we do not really have a story that is written by an author that is predetermined, but the story just emerges from the gameplay. So from the interactions with the different systems of the game or just by random events. And one pretty good example is this one.
Got a little soul, the world is go place to be.
Welcome to a world full of exceptional Sims. Smarter, with big personalities, who every day collide and connect. They are yours to create and control. Their stories are yours to tell. There's the story of Ollie Perdue, a starving artist without his muse. Depressed, Ollie spent his days alone, and his nights seeking inspiration. He didn't laugh, and he didn't dance. Babs Lamore, a bartender, had dreams of her own. A romantic, she was forever on a quest for true love. Until she met the one. Ollie fell for her way with words, and his technique left Babs inspired. The budding novelist began writing her own story. The story of Babs Lamore and Ollie Perdue.
Okay, and so this is examples from The Sims, and The Sims is just a simulation. You don't have any story in the game, but you can do whatever you want with your player. You can act with the systems of the game, you can interact with other characters in the game, and from this you can write your own story. So the player has full control over the story that he or she wants to write during the time he plays the game. And this is called emergent storytelling. Another method is environmental storytelling. So environmental storytelling means the story is not told by dialogues or cutscenes, movies, but just the environment around you that you're exploring tells the story. So you could find interactive things in the environment, like documents, messages, audio logs, books that you can look at, or even the whole setting, the furniture around you. If you enter a room and it is messed up or it is cleaned up, tells you something about the person that is living in this room. And this is called environmental storytelling. And I have an example from a game that only uses environmental storytelling. So this
Katie, I'm so sorry.
This is from Gone Home, and you don't have any dialogues or cutscenes in this game. You're just exploring an empty house. Just by exploring this empty house, you understand what happened there. Like, only by this the story is told.
We moved into this house.
Good, and the last one, last method that I have is like tell a story through interactions. This means this one is predetermined. It has an author that wants to tell something, but we don't use cutscenes or like really linear movies, but the player has a control over the gameplay all the time, and the story is really told in an interactive way, just through the interactions you do as a player. I also have an example for this. This is from What Remains of Edith Finch, where the player plays
Dear Mrs.
a
Finch,
guy that has
as
a really
Lewis's psychiatrist, I
boring,
can understand your desire for an
boring
explanation.
and repetitive
As I
job
see it, the
in a
trouble
fish
began in
factory.
January, shortly after we convinced your son to seek treatment for substance abuse. Newly
And
sober,
because it's
I
so
believe Lewis
boring and
first noticed
repetitive,
the monotony
he
of his daily
escapes into a fantasy world. So, player
He kept working at the
needs
camera,
to do this boring, repetitive task on the one hand,
but he withdrew
and
part of himself.
it's really always the same, but at the same
In
time,
our sessions, I
we'll
saw
see
the
this in a
same
moment,
behavior.
he needs to control the imaginative
His
character
mind
in this
began
fantasy
to
world.
wander.
The guy that you play is
I asked him to describe it.
it's imaginative. You see this
He
now
said
here,
he
it's
started
overlaid
small,
on the other screen. And this
imagining a
transport, this
labyrinth.
feeling, like the story should, or the
He'd feel his way about.
interactions really transport the feeling of being in one place, but also being
Then
at another
something new.
place, in this
Bats.
fantasy world, just in your mind. And you control
And
both at the
toads.
same time, which is a little bit difficult and challenging.
And things that
to
have
do
not
this.
names.
But this is actually a pretty good way
He knew it
this in an interactive way. Okay, so I gave you 3 methods how you can like try to connect gameplay and story: emergent storytelling, environmental storytelling, or storytelling through interactions. And now the question is like, could this also be done by an AI, or do you need a human to do this? I said like in the beginning, yeah, it's pretty, pretty likely that we will have books or screenplays for movies that will be written by machines in the near future, and also for this pretty linear stories in games, or the pretty separated, where the games where the story and gameplay are pretty separated. This might also work when it works for movies, but for these more interactive techniques, emergent, environmental, or interactions, is it also possible to use an AI to write these stories? And I don't have an answer to this, but this is a really interesting research question, and maybe this is also something that could give you ideas for your projects during the hackathon. I have one last example, a little glimpse into the future of what might be possible with AI in games. This example is in Modbox, which is a kind of game creation sandbox. So you can create a lot of things in this, and it's possible to visit then your creation in virtual reality. And someone connected this, or like the makers of this connected this to the Windows speech recognition, so the player can actually say something which is recognized. And then they connected it to OpenAI's GPT-3. So they use the recognized voice as an input for the GPT-3 algorithm, which creates an answer, and then this answer is made to sound by a replicas natural speech synthesis, and this looks like this.
Hello, Bobby.
What do you want?
Where are you going?
I have to go to work. I'm already late, and my boss will punish me if I show up even later. Please leave. I can't help you right now.
Where do you work?
I work at City Hall. It's a government building in the center of town. It's a huge and beautiful building. You can't miss it.
What street is it on?
You're smart. I like that about you. City Hall is located on City Hall Street location.
Alright, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Okay, we'll talk to this hot dog man. Hey, hot dog man.
What can I get you?
What kind of hot dogs do you have?
We have 3 kinds of hot dogs. The normal hot dog, the sweet hot dog, and the very spicy hot dog.
Can I get a deal? 3 for 1 hot dog?
Sorry, we can't do that. The customers would not like it.
Well, how much is a hot dog?
One normal hot dog is 6 coins, one sweet hot dog is 10 coins, and a very spicy hot dog is 9 coins.
What makes it so spicy?
It has some Tabasco sauce on it that makes it very hot.
Alright, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Okay. This example still has some flaws. Of course, you need to wait for an answer very long. Sometimes it does not really fit together. And of course, this is not a story yet. It has no story arc, no rising tension or something like this. This is something that you will need to add to this. But I think it gives a very good impression of how you could experience a story or an interactive story in games in the future. And yeah, this concludes my talk. Thank you much for your attention.